Yeah, no intro yet, sadly, for 2024, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to do reviews. And this review was, of course, sponsored by you, the viewers. Someone actually took up the $50 to $100 challenge for me to actually, well, not really challenge, but the segment, donation, what have you, to basically cover the first arc of a story. And the first arc of a story for 2024, the first media review really for 2024, is none other than the Guild of Gamers, Supervillain. And the best way I can describe this fanfic is what would happen if someone played something unlimited for an ungodly amount of time, and basically said, hold my beer, I'm gonna do one better. And honestly, if they actually had the programming skills to actually turn this into a game like Something Unlimited, they'd probably get a lot of money out of it, I'm not gonna lie. Something Unlimited actually is making bank, and that is a Justice League Unlimited crossover where you basically build a brothel full of heroines and villainesses, and a lot of other crossover. Just Something Unlimited is impressive. That's all I'm gonna say. Alright. So what exactly is Guild of Gamers Supervillain? As I stated before, it is Something Unlimited the fanfiction, although this one actually does have a copious amount of sex.
Oh my.
But not to the degree that it actually takes away from the story, thank God. It actually is implemented in a way that does actually blend in and make sense for what you're reading. I would recommend you read the AO3 version because the fanfiction version honestly is not good. It feels neutered almost. And grandfanfiction.net isn't exactly the most... yeah... Anyway... The big thing, though, I will say about the Guild of Gamers is that the story itself is actually pretty fun. Now, I'm not going to spoil a lot of it, but I will cover some key elements from the first arc, which I am lovingly going to say is the power grab arc, or at least the building, the establishment arc. And in a sense, we have a businessman who literally basically gets hit by Truck Coon, and the self-aware humor in this is actually a breath of fresh air for a lot of isekai stories. And yes, there are some that do become self-aware and do metagame. They even joke about metagaming. And basically this man, who was a businessman who did some, basically what we have nowadays of a tech mogul, but is a nerd, or a closeted nerd, actually does go into a world of superheroes. Now, I would have went to a world of My Hero Academia, except it wasn't My Hero Academia. He went to a world of Worm, and this is where that Something Unlimited comes back into play. Now, I have no knowledge of Worm whatsoever, so I'm going into this blind. But everything else that's introduced to this, which is DC, My Hero Academia, that's my bread and butter, because I grew up in the 90s, okay? I'm turning 30 in March of 2024. I grew up on the Timverse, the DCAU Timverse. So the fact that this person, this author, Shiro, is actually using the Timverse DC instead of what we have right now is, well, I'm gonna say it's definitely a breath of fresh air. So, as stated before, that's where the Something Unlimited feel and vibes come into play, so let's go ahead and get into it. Right off the bat, this person's name is, of course, Midas. Midas, of course, for those of you who do not understand mythology, was basically a king who was cursed by cursed by a Greek goddess to basically be able to turn everything into gold. Sadly, that includes himself. And basically, it's an interesting mythological story, and it actually is kind of fun. They are Japanese, and of course, etc., 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 you know how that goes. Now, of course, there is also a lot more into this, but like I said, I want to not spoil it because it legitimately is well written, and I legitimately want you guys to go read it behind closed doors. This is one of those fics you do not read in public. Much like if you don't play Something Unlimited. It may seem like I'm shilling for it, but like I said, I've actually played Something Unlimited, and if you've played Something Unlimited and you read this fanfic, you'll understand why this feels like Something Unlimited. So, with that said, as this guy moves in, he basically goes and takes over territory, the merchant's territory, which is right on the docks. And so, after he takes over, he starts building and implementing his empire of sorts, his kingdom of sorts. And the archetype the author's going for with the main character is a Lex Luthor type, or at least a type of smart villain who is suave, who is sophisticated, who is a man of vice, but the vice is not detrimental. His vice is women. Although if he does go on later on and make a joke about the fact that he may be bi-curious, he could definitely throw in some twinks in there if he wants to, because let's face it, the DCAU has more than a few twinks that he can throw in there if he wants to. Especially some other... Yeah, anyway. We're not going to get into that. No, what we're concentrating on is the main character and what he's doing. Especially the fact that he has, of course, his... number one... man.
And Bob. Remember, you are my number one guy.
He has Bob. He has a Bob. And yes, I cannot see him as any other than Bob. Whether he treats this Bob as the Joker, or at least Jack Nicholson's Joker's Bob did to his Bob, I don't know. And it would be justified, because again, it's Bob. He was his, number one guy. Jokes aside, and of course one of the better Batman movies, there is no Batman or Superman in this world. There are a lot of capes, but none of the big male hitters, at least. Joker is, of course, in jail, and Harley Quinn is here as well as Pamela Isley. Now, he did decide to go with, once again, a mixture of not only, of course, the Timverse DCAU, but I suspect he's also going, of course, for the Harley Quinn show design as well. And in my opinion, my guy, Shiro, you need to have Midas try and kind of hook these two up. Harley Quinn is an agent of chaos, much like Nora Valkyrie from Ruby, or that blue-haired girl from Camp Camp, or any other character, with Pamela Isley being her grounding tool. There's a reason why they work as a couple. There's a reason why when the Batman the Animated Series came around and we saw Pamela Isley and Harley Quinn kind of controlling Bruce and kind of making him basically be their sugar daddy for the day, there's a reason why they work together. They literally come on, they complete each other, basically. And I'm not saying this just because I do the whole, hey, you know, Pamela Isley, Harley Quinn ship thing. No, it's because their personalities work so well. Pamela Isley is a doctor, but at the same time, she recognizes Harley Quinn as someone who is broken. Someone who needs a grounded figure in their life. Harley Quinn, recognizing that the Joker was not healthy for her and abused her, basically. It was an abusive relationship. Kind of goes towards Ivy because the fact she is that grounded personality. So, again, Harley Quinn, grounded and actually having a directing force that is good for her, is good. And you basically can have it to where, hey, you know, if you want to try and have a relationship with these two, or at least have the main character have a relationship with these two, he's going to wait until, you know, they kind of have a good relationship first. And if he doesn't want that relationship, at least he can help try and cultivate their relationship and kind of be that confidant, that friend that they can have. And if need be, a marriage counselor, because, or hell, even a relationship counselor. Because let's face it, Harley and Ivy had fights in the past in the comics, and when that moment does happen, that's going to be a thing. It's going to be a whole thing. It really is. Now, the big thing, though, is the fact that this man has done the one thing in this story that makes it very interesting. The man is taking cues from not just DC, My Hero Academia, and Worm a little bit. He's also taking cues from cyberpunk, actually introducing cyberware. He is chroming up chums left and right and getting gonks basically flatlined left and right. Because let's face it, if you go up against a megacorp, you're gonna get flatlined. You go up against some guys like Militech or Arasaka, you get flatlined. You try to be a netrunner and try and going in against these guys, you get flatlined. So what you do, you basically pay respect to the big dog, and you know who's in charge, or you're gonna get flatlined. If you can't tell, I love cyberpunk. I mean, hell, I literally have 2 cyberpunk guns I'm building. I've already built a cyberpunk gun, for God's sakes. His name is also Bob. Just so you know. So, yeah, the fact that he's introducing cyberpunk elements will lead into my speculations of how he could go forward in the future. Now, this is where things can get a little more fun, because as time went on in the build-up, and the fact that he is basically playing the PR war, much like Lex Luthor did in Harley Quinn, as well as the fact of, it's clear he's trying to create a Harley Quinn's type world, where yes, the villains are out in the world, and they do have their own lives outside of being a villain. They have a Legion of Doom, and it is basically corporatized. It's basically corporate. And that, again, is a good thing, because the fact that they now have accountability, the fact they now have a actual legitimate corporation, you know, that could be something that could kind of blend into the cyberpunk elements. The other thing is that the PRT, or at least the Paranormal Response Team, or Parahuman Response Team, a pseudo-paramilitary organization akin to SWAT, is not exactly prepared for this. They're more used to being able to fight head-on and get things done, and maintain the status quo. We have a guy here who is basically Lex Luthor realized, of course, who is literally coming in and completely throwing the status quo out the window because it doesn't work. In a literal sense, he is pulling a Jeremy Irons from Call of Duty Advanced Warfare. He is setting up his own thing.
With all due respect, the United Nations is a relic from a different time when nations were unique in their ability to solve the world's problems. But that just isn't the case anymore. Primarily because you have outsourced the job to me. I have sent people to die in your wars. So I feel uniquely qualified to tell you, your wars don't work. Which is why my priorities have changed from profits to policy. Because politicians don't know how to solve problems, but I do. So let's be clear. I am here to solve the world's problems. And I believe the world's problems begin with you.
And going forward, I could see him actually holding military-style parades in his own territory, showing a might of power, with his soldiers, quote-unquote soldiers, in full uniform, rifles on their arms, marching down Main Street, with him, of course, at a podium, basically like Joseph Stalin, Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, basically, or Kim Il-sung's son. Every known ruler literally waving at him, or of course saluting him as they march by with a benevolent smile on his face. The people cheering at their protectors, marching down the street in their goose-stomping jackboots, or just straight-up marching boots. Now, that's not to say that the heroes aren't being played. And speaking of the heroes, the dude actually has introduced, as of Chapter 28, the Incredibles, and is doing everything in his power to basically literally have his harem grow. And yes, he does have a harem, and like I said, that's where that Something Unlimited feels come in, because anytime he can, he is literally plowing many a villainess or many a heroine. And yes, it is as somewhat tasteful, but as pornographic as you can think. And again, the fact that it doesn't take away from the story, but actually blends into the flow of it, is a welcome reprieve, honestly. Not a lot of authors can actually tastefully implement sex into a story, and it actually go with the flow. This ain't the 50 Shades of Grey type crap. This is actually a good hentai flow, if you know what I mean, and a good hentai. The kind of hentai where you can watch it for the story, and it seamlessly blend into the sex. That takes a level of skill that not a lot of people have, and not a lot of people can execute properly. But the author here has executed it properly, and well done. And it doesn't help the fact that the Wonder Woman section feels like something out of Something Unlimited. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about, because that's exactly what it feels like. And yes, this dude basically is living every man's fantasy from the 90s to the early 2000s, from Justice League and Justice League Unlimited, because the design he used was, in fact, Wonder Woman. You lucky son of a bitch. So, yeah. That out of the way, he's basically setting up for the arc with the conflict of course, the ABB, which is mostly an Asian American group, and of course the 88s, or the Empire. Basically a neo-Nazi clan. And, yeah. Nazis.
Illinois Nazis. I hate Illinois Nazis.
They're not Illinois Nazis, sadly, because this takes place in Massachusetts, but then again, Massachusetts Nazis really don't have the same ring as Illinois Nazis either. Oh well, here's what I believe one could do leading up to it, and here's how the author could go about it. In terms of actually kind of going forward with the story, he could have it to where he's doing this show of power, these big, grandiose military parades, because he could actually build another company, which is basically sort of a counter to the PRT. He could actually make his own Militech. He could actually introduce Militech forces, because let's face it, you have a lot of disgruntled military forces and a lot of disgruntled cops, hell, a lot of disgruntled capes, who literally are not happy with the status quo. He could bring them in and give them augments to actually not only make their powers better, but also make them better. And again, be like, of course, either Atlas from Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, or like Militech, or, in this case, Arasaka. Although I am more leaning towards Militech because I'm an American, and by God, I love my country. And literally build up a military force to take on these guys. However, his territory only literally borders the ABB, not really the neo-Nazis. However, he does have access to the Bay. So, in a literal sense, what he could do is take lessons from military history. This is where we actually get to have a little bit of fun, because I myself, who plays Airsoft and also does love military history, could actually tell you, author Shiro, how you could go forward with your character if they actually do have a military mindset. And yes, I know they do technically because I got the Warlord perk, but again, not trying to spoil it for those watching. What the man could do on the ground is take a lesson from, of all things, the Gulf War. He could have his tanks and his ground forces backed up by air assets actually charge into the territory and literally go at it like it was basically 6 days in Fallujah. From, of course, down south, with the Bay, he could have naval forces conducting naval landings, and again, push into the territory, under the guise of the fact of the ABB have what he has found to be weapons of mass destruction, or even the threat of chemical weapons. Justifying it as the fact of, again, the ABB being Asian Americans, he could try and kind of come up with some convoluted way of saying, hey, they have these weapons of mass destruction, they've got chemical weapons, they are doing stuff that the PRT has basically let go on long enough, and with the blessing of the US government, I am going to basically change that. Again, he could kind of strong-arm it in a way to where, as soon as he gains control of the ABB territory, because he's talking with the US government, not the PRT, he could come to a deal with the US government, allowing this to be basically a testing ground for his weapons and his augments, allowing the US military to kind of look at it and be like, well, we've seen the data, we've seen the combat footage, we'd like to put an order for a lot of them. Because if you know anything about the Army and the military and military acquisition, you know damn well they are willing to spend a metric fuck ton of money on anything. Need a good example? Look at the Advanced Weapon Program. Look at what led to, of course, the GL-25, or GL-20, basically that airburst grenade rifle that inevitably was apparently a fucking war crime weapon. We did not think that one through, I'll be honest. But like I said, Midas basically is a Lex Luthor archetype. He can see money. He can smell money. So a conflict that can inevitably lead to massive military contracts with the US government, you know damn well Homeboy gonna be going for that. Now, of course, I know many of you are asking, is there a counter to this? For every yin, there is a yang. And in this case, the person, quote-unquote, countering this, which has led, of course, to a Cold War with the supers and the capes, is none other than his, quote-unquote, twin brother, Jin, who is, of course, known as Prophet, or Oracle, whichever one you want to go for. Well, actually, no, Prophet. It actually is Prophet, because Oracle actually is here, and there actually is a story about it, and she does have powers, which is actually very much so makes sense for her. There's also, apparently, a pseudo-question type person in this that apparently is trying to give someone a hint the fact they may or may not be into BDSM. But, in all seriousness, though, ladies and gentlemen, I would spoil it a little bit for you, but I don't want to, because again, I want you to go read this. Legitimately, there is a good setup here for not only a political thriller in the second arc, but also a very much so cementing of power. And like I said, what this guy could do is actually look at history. Look at the Gulf War and the invasion, the 6 days in Fallujah, or hell, even of course the Vietnam War, and you allowing yourself to be able to literally not only, of course, do a beach landing like we did in Grenada back in the 80s, but also be able to do a ride of the Valkyries, because, let's face it, anyone and their mother knows that the Huey is the very much so most mass-produced fucking helicopter back during the day. Let's face it, you can buy those things in fleets for cheap, but if you really want to go with the fact of, hey, this guy could literally do a ride of the Valkyries, by all fucking means, do Ride of the Valkyries, except Ride the Valkyries, fucking make it Rock You Like a Hurricane by the Scorpions, or fucking any other goddamn awesome song from the fucking 80s. Because let's face it, the moment those skies start speaking 80s hair metal and bullets start raining down on them, because if they move, they're ABB! If they don't move, they are well-trained ABB! Type shit that you can do in the coming arc, in the coming fucking war. I'm just saying, okay? But in all seriousness, though, and my love of war aside, legitimately, there is a lot you can do with the story going forward. Yes, the inevitable spoiler here that, yes, he's trying to get Helen from The Incredibles, Elastigirl, into his harem. Don't. Or at least, don't yet, I guess I should say. I mean, I'm not a homewrecker type person, and she does have kids. I mean, hell, she did have a baby with Bob. Not our favorite number one guy, Bob, her husband, Bob. And unless you're willing to be a good stepfather, which he did basically make himself be infertile, which I'm not saying that's a bad idea. I'm saying that when it gets to a point, you're going to want to have heirs for your kingdom. So that way, if something should happen to you, you have a line of succession. I'm just saying. I mean, hell, Norinobu Arasaka kind of has his heirs, be it his daughter and, of course, his son, who... Moving on. I'm just saying, though, that there is a lot you have here, and a lot you can do going forward, especially with the implementation of the US government. Because, again, using this awesome clip from Batman the Dark Knight, the animated version, the real version of Batman vs. Superman, thank you very much, fuck you, Zack Snyder!
Years later, this report came out that Roosevelt might have known Pearl Harbor was coming and let it happen. That rattled around in my head for days. How horrible it would be if it were true. Then again, it's what got us into the war. A lot of men died. But in the end, it saved millions. I bounced back and forth like that until I realized it was too big for me to judge. He was too big.
If he becomes too big, if he becomes too well connected politically, even if they do inevitably catch him, even if they do inevitably put him behind bars, or at least attempt to put him behind bars, on something as simple as, say, tax evasion, which, let's face it, again, quoting the Joker here.
I'm crazy enough to take on Batman, but the IRS? No, thank you.
If you do get him, it's going to be the interrogation scene from Lord of War.
I like you, Jack. Well, maybe not, but I understand you. Let me tell you what's going to happen. This way you can prepare yourself.
Okay.
Soon there's going to be a knock on that door and you will be called outside. In the hall, there will be a man who outranks you. First, he'll compliment you on the fine job you've done, that you're making the world a safer place, that you're to receive a commendation and a promotion. And then he's going to tell you that I am to be released. You're going to protest. You'll probably threaten to resign. But in the end, I will be released. The reason I'll be released is the same reason you think I'll be convicted. I do rub shoulders with some of the most vile, sadistic men calling themselves leaders today. But some of those men are the enemies of your enemies. And while the biggest arms dealer in the world is your boss, the President of the United States, who ships more merchandise in a day than I do in a year, sometimes it's embarrassing to have his fingerprints on the guns. Sometimes he needs a freelancer like me to supply forces he can't be seen supplying. So, you call me evil, but unfortunately for you, I'm a necessary evil.
Not only will he be too big to take down, but he'll be too valuable to many governments around the world that they can't afford to have him behind bars. He's too valuable. He's too powerful. Well, not really too powerful, just too valuable. Because if you try to take away the one thing that is providing their militaries, their fighting forces, with the very fucking thing they need and want, they're gonna protect his ass. Not only that, but you take away the Super's ability to basically... Yeah, no, people are going to want him not be behind bars for very long. If he does be behind bars, it's basically going to be like Che Guevara. Well, not really Che Guevara, more like Pablo Escobar, where he has his own prison basically built for him, with women, with swimming pools, with tennis courts, to basically carry out his probable short sentence of maybe a year or two. If anything, the man is going to be very popular, especially not only amongst the common people, much like Pablo Escobar, but also among those of business, much like Lex Luthor. And again, a good villain, or at least a great supervillain, is one who is morally gray, and has both the moral high ground and the moral low ground. And let's be honest here, the moment he decides to take away his infidelity, or at least his infertileness, and allow his seed to spread to his harem, he's going to have a ton of bastards, or at least in this case, he's going to have a ton of heirs. And even if he, quote-unquote, disappears, he leaves the empire he built in the hands of his children. And inevitably, a war will happen. Because let's be honest here, the most ambitious of them shall be the one to try and take the throne. It shall be Game of Thrones. which I'm not saying, a red wedding would happen, but, a red wedding might happen. Either way, though, ladies and gentlemen, I will admit this now, the story is legitimately a fun read, and I highly recommend you check it out. Now, again, I'm not saying it's a bad story. In reality, I do legitimately enjoy it. And again, the author has a lot here, and I'm going to say that again. He has a lot to set himself up, not only, of course, a Militech-type corporation, but even an Atlas-type corporation that works closely with the U.S. government, if not international governments and international militaries, as well as law enforcement. And again, he could do that! That way, if and when the war does inevitably happen, the motherfucker could basically have carte blanche to basically use whatever force he needs, while following, of course, the Geneva Convention, because, again, as much as we love to jokingly say, Geneva Convention, more like Geneva Suggestion, any smart man knows, especially a smart dictator knows, you do not want to be seen as a war criminal. As much as you do fucked up shit, you do not want to be seen in the same light as Adolf, Mussolini, Gaddafi, Stalin, fucking Saddam even. So let's try and keep ourselves at least a benevolent but firm military leader, shall we? And keep the war crimes to a minimum so the UN doesn't come butting in and we aren't being thrown into a M. Bison situation where the entire world is basically breathing down on top of us.
For I beheld Satan as he fell from heaven like lightning!
Just saying, But, in all seriousness though, ladies and gentlemen, it is a fun story. And it is down here, of course, in the pinned comment. And if you guys want, of course, want me to, of course, review more stories, well, there will be a video at the end of this kind of explaining how you can sponsor that, or even, just some regular things down below in the pinned comment. Now, if you also want to help out the channel, then check out the, links down below. Be it, of course, from tracer units to even grenades. You guys can basically help support the channel by using those links down below. Even medkits we're helping with our partner links. Or if you just want to help out the channel directly, consider donating via the PayPal or Cash App down below. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, I've been Airsoft Owl, and let me know in the comments section down below, is Guild of Gamers Supervillain a Something Unlimited fanfiction realized? Or just someone who is, like me from the 90s, living out a power fantasy thinking that if they were a Lex Luthor archetype, then they could actually, do it better than him? Let me know in the comments section down below. And as always, I will see you all in the next media reviews, where hopefully we shall have a fucking intro for 2024. Hopefully. Till next time!